Go ahead and get started. So, shortly we'll get into the Tanya, and in the meantime, we'll start with a little bit about the Parsha of the week. So this is Parshat Pinchas. If we recall, it's actually the last few verses of the Parsha of Balak, where we talk about Pinchas. So Pinchas is the one who ends the plague that's afflicting the Jewish people. So at the very end of Balak, Bilam sort of finds a way to curse them. He doesn't really curse them. He kind of gives Balak a little secret about how to get to them, how to get them to sin in God's eyes. And the Moabite women and the Midianite women all come and seduce the Jewish men until they get so brazen that one of the guys does it right in front of Moshe, grabs one of the women and right in a tent, right in front of everybody. And Pinchas picks up a sword and goes in the tent and kills him. And that's the end of the plague. And the beginning of this portion, God says to Pinchas that Pinchas has found favor in God's eyes. People were ready to judge Pinchas, for being a murderer. And God says, no, he saved you. He saved you all from a plague. I think it claimed, it's 20-something thousand lives, 22, 24,000, something like this.
Seems like they're always 24,000.
Yeah, it's big numbers.
It's a magic number.
So, anyway, that's a surface level story. Now in the Zohar, Pinchas is something like 600 or 700 sections. So it's a massive volume of Zohar. It's one of the biggest, probably one of the top three, if not the top one.
Why so big? Why so long?
Because there's so much to talk about. It's really, Now it's interesting. What we say about the Zohar is that what it means when a portion has a great deal of commentary on it is it means that its wisdom has been revealed in our time for us to be aware of and study and learn from. And if it's not revealed, it doesn't mean there's not just as much. In fact, you could say that there's more. But it's still being held in a level of secrecy that is still our responsibility to reveal. So this has already been revealed on our behalf about 2,000 years ago by Rabbi Shimon. And many Kabbalists identify that a great deal of this deals with medical issues. So in some of these sections it says the liver, the heart, the gall, the trachea, the esophagus. It talks about the relationship with the shofar. And it identifies things like, for example, that the liver cleanses the blood. Now, I don't know how they could have known that 2,000 years ago. I don't really think that there was enough medical history to have collected that kind of information.
Isn't it true that a lot of the medical stuff is in the Zohar?
Yeah. I mean, even the idea of, I was trying to look for it again today, and I just didn't have enough time, but I've got a whole section that talks about, it gives the exact quotations of where it is some of these different things are revealed. So, for example, I can find the one right here because it's right before we're reading what we're going to read tonight. And it talks about how the liver cleanses the blood. Then there's a part about the gall and the spleen. Now, a lot of it is very like esoteric, I guess you would say. Kind of hard to understand exactly what it's talking about here. It says the spleen laughs. Okay, I'd have to read more to tell you what that means. I'm not sure. But it identifies the different kinds of fats. So the idea being that like there's good cholesterol and bad cholesterol. Many different spiritual ideas like this. But we're not going to focus on that particular aspect tonight, although I do want to focus on healing. So there's a section here that's talking about an eagle. And here's what it says. I'm going to read it in English. While they were walking along, so this is talking about students of Rabbi Shimon, a large eagle came and circled their heads, remaining over them. Rabbi Pinchas said, "This is certainly a favorable time right now, and the gates of mercy are open." Remember that, the gates of mercy. The gates of mercy are open for all those who are on a sickbed, and this is the time to heal them. And although they are the prisoners of the king, for they are confined to their beds, this eagle is a sign of mercy, For the face of the eagle is the secret of the central column, which is mercy. So now it mentions this idea of mercy in the central column. So that idea comes from Ezekiel. So in Ezekiel 1, it's talking about this chariot that will come down, and the chariot has on it 4 faces, 4 animals, and it says about their faces. There's a likeness of their faces. There was a human face, a lion's face to the right, an ox's face to the left, and an eagle's face facing forward, center. So that's what it's referring to when it says that the eagle is the central column. So the eagle is the center of this chariot. And the idea of it being mercy. Okay, so mercy is a very unique idea Kabbalistically. So, the Zohar describes the creation of the world, describes that God tried to create the world entirely with mercy and entirely with judgment. He found that neither one was possible. So we ended up creating it with both. So we live in the aspect of mercy and judgment all the time. And in fact, if we look at the names of God, and Rabbi Wein shares rather frequently, the name of God that's made of the Yud, the Hey, the Vav, and the Hey, this is God's name when it comes to mercy. And when we see the name Elohim, this is God's name representing judgment. So, for example, when we say a blessing, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, we are talking about both the merciful and the judgmental aspects of Hashem. When we say Shema, we say the merciful one twice. Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. So we're saying that Hashem created the world in mercy. He is the one who brings judgment, but even his judgment comes from a place of mercy. It's one way to watch the flow of these words. And so the concept of mercy is one that reappears over and over again. Now, what in the world does mercy have to do with saying that those are on a sick bed and this is the time to heal them, because the gates of mercy are open? So sickness, disease, represents judgment. That's what it is. It's judgment, not exactly darkness. And I don't want to say it's evil. I don't want to say it's dark, because judgment is just the other side of the coin of mercy. Okay, so they're opposing forces, but they're not opposite forces, so to speak. So
you wouldn't say that sickness is punishment.
You would say that sickness is an absence of mercy. It's an absence of the light force of the Creator. That's what it is. It's an aspect of judgment. It's an aspect where judgment has become out of balance with the level of mercy. Okay, so we all have to have mercy and judgment in our lives in order to live, and I'll explain how that plays out in the story of Pinchas in just a minute. We all need an aspect of both of them. That's how we live, but we need them in balance. When they become imbalanced, that's when we become sick. So an analogy that I heard, for example, is if you have a room that's dark and you bring in, we'll say, a jar of light, a lantern, a candle, something like that, the darkness disappears. Where does the darkness go? It's a trick question. Who cares? It disappeared. Okay, we're good. We got the light. Okay, now let's say I have a room full of light and I bring in a jar of darkness. How dark can I make that room? There's nothing you can do, right? And that's the aspect of how our life should be. Our life should be that the mercy, the light, is always refilling those places of judgment, so that you're in mercy, so that you're in balance. So you've got places of judgment. For example, that's why we say gomel. When a person travels over the sea, or if they travel in the air, or if they're in a life-threatening situation, that means that there was an aspect of judgment that either had the potential to hang over them or that was actually hanging over them. So somebody, God forbid, was in a life-threatening situation and they survived that. they were actually in a place of judgment for a period of time, in a hole, basically, where their judgment was possible. And even when you fly, when you disconnect yourself from land and you fly, especially over the sea, or travel over the sea, like on a boat, you say gomel, you say this prayer, because it's basically refilling that gap with light. It's rebalancing the forces of judgment and mercy. Okay? So that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about the gates being open and the ability to refill this gap that you have, this sickness, this imbalance, and rebalance it from the aspect of mercy. Okay? So most people would look at through this and say, okay, then I'll just live my whole life with mercy. Okay? Be careful. Like we said, things have to be in balance. What does a life of only mercy look like? Well, now that's interesting. And some of the Kabbalistic commentators will say that at the end of Parshat Balak, when Bilam is trying to curse them and curse them and curse them, the reason he's not successful is because the Jews are living at that time only in a place of mercy. Only in a place of mercy. So they're completely immune from the judgment that they're trying to put on them. But what does that really look like? So imagine somebody who's just constantly trying to fill you with mercy and fill you with mercy and fill you with mercy. So imagine that somebody finds out what your favorite drink is from Starbucks. Okay, so next time they see you, they've already got the cup prepared and they bring it to you. Oh, that was very, very nice of you. You know? So imagine the next morning they show up your house with this drink. Oh, okay, that was maybe a little bit strange. Imagine the next day that they're hovering over your bed waiting for you to wake up to hand you the cup of coffee. Right? Because this is all, they're just trying to give you. They're just trying to be nice. This is what you wanted, right? No, now you're getting creepy. Right? And that's where it gets weird. But that's what only mercy looks like. Mercy puts you in a weird spot. It basically takes away from you your ability to create your own happiness. Maybe sometimes I want to get myself that drink. I don't need you to go to this level of an extreme in order to make me happy. And in fact, I'm not going to allow you to do that. You're putting me in prison by trying to make me happy. It sounds kind of strange, but that's what you're doing. You're holding me prisoner from creating my own happiness by just constantly bringing me everything you think I want. And I do. I want all those things. But I want them for myself, not for you to constantly be giving them to me. And that's what was happening. So, again, some of the Kabbalists will say that's what was happening with the Jews at that time in the desert. Everything was just being given to them and given to them and given to them. And they had created another type of prison, basically, for themselves, wandering in the wilderness. And that allowed them to be susceptible to the darkness and the judgment from the Midianite and the Moabite women. They became susceptible through this. They became completely dependent on it.
Be there every morning and then replenish.
The manna would always be there, the food always would be there.
So what Pinchas did was he brought judgment back to the world. When you kill somebody, I think we can agree that that's judgment, right?
Definitely.
Yes. And we're going to shy away from calling it negative or evil or dark or whatever or anything like that. But it's judgment. There's no question. Sickness and death represent the aspects of judgment. That's what they are.
Too,
right. So in this case, it's recreating the balance for the entire community of the Jews who were wandering the desert at the time. And that's what found favor in God's eyes. When Pinchas slaughtered, I think it's Zimri and Cosbi, when he slaughters them, that's when he brings favor in God's eyes, because he brings the corrected, balanced aspect of judgment back into the world. And that's really what makes you immune from curses. Otherwise, you're vulnerable. You think that you can't be cursed, but you're vulnerable. All right. So that's a little bit about Parshat Pinchas. The only thing I thought was very interesting that I found in one of the commentaries this parsha is also, it's not when Moshe dies, but it's when Moshe finds out that he's going to die, and then he's going to die. He's going to be given a glimpse of Eretz Yisrael, of the Holy Land, and then he's going to die in the same way that Aaron, his brother, did by the kiss of Hashem. And Moses says, "Please appoint a successor. Don't let the Jews wander and be like sheep without a shepherd." And when he calls upon Hashem to do so, he he uses an interesting phrase. He refers to the attribute that he is like the leader or the guide of all the angels and all the prophets. I don't remember exactly what it is right now. I don't have it right in front of me. But he instead of pointing to the idea that Hashem is infinitely merciful, which we hear about and read about all the time, or that Hashem is long to anger, or how much he loves his people, he hints at this idea of how he is the guide and leader of this broad range of individuals and angels. So I find that it's quite related to what we were talking about in the Tanya last week. So in the Tanya last week, the author, Rabbi Shneur Zalman, he's talking about, he's using the rebuttal of the community against himself. So the community, he's using the community's not judgment, he's using their criticism against the idea that a book can somehow be a replacement for a spiritual guide. Because he's been the spiritual guide of the community for a few decades at this point, a couple decades at least, and he's preparing a book from a series of pamphlets that he had written that basically are a summary of the teachings that he had given over the past couple of decades to his students. And he's using his students or the community's argument against himself first. So basically he's saying, so how is it that a book can be a spiritual guide? And he's basically saying, well, it can't. Here's reason 1 why it can't, and here's reason 2 why it can't, and here's reason 3 why it can't. But then he also, towards the end of that, when he begins to rationalize how it is possible, I'm not going to try and find it right now, but he mentions these particular rabbis. One in particular, when he greeted the other rabbi, he said the blessing that we say when we see an assembly of 600,000 Jews or more. There's a special blessing we say. I don't even know when it's ever been said in history, but there is a blessing that we say when you see an assembly of 600,000 Jews or more together, and one rabbi would bless the other rabbi in this way. So the reason why he says that he blessed him that way is because this particular rabbi had the wisdom to see the individual spark of each of the 600,000 original souls that were out at Mount Sinai, meaning he had the ability to treat each person as an individual. So within him was contained 600,000 or more Jews, because he had the wisdom in order to transmit his knowledge and his information individually, even though it's the same set of knowledge, even though it's the same wisdom, even though he had the ability to read an individual in such a way that he could communicate with them in that way. So this is actually the attribute that Moses decides to point out on behalf of Hashem when he calls for a new leader. He says, you, the one who's able to see each one of your followers as an individual, this attribute is the one that needs to bring a new leader. And as part of that, he's also pointing out, and hopefully that leader will be someone who's also able to do something similar, who's able to lead not 600,000 people, but 600,000 individuals as a group. Okay, and that's what he's pointing out as Hashem's attribute, that Hashem is able to see and lead individuals and able to see the wisdom and the characteristics within each one of them, and that you should appoint a new shepherd in order to lead them with that same attribute in that same way. So there's a good overlap there. I thought that was very interesting, and that's what that's what the author of the Tanya is trying to do. He's trying to find a way to transmit his spiritual wisdom and his spiritual knowledge from all these individual private meetings over the course of a couple of decades in such a way that it will speak to each one of us as an individual. And that's kind of where we left off last week. That was the last thing he was trying to do to kind of convince us that yes, this can be done. So we'll try and pick up from that. I'm going to skip a little bit the very last part. He makes a what's called a pre-publication note, which I think I mentioned before. It was back in those days. It was the late 1700s. It was basically a way of copyrighting your information. Okay, so you would say this is uniquely mine, and I place a restriction on publication of this. I think they can only do it for like for a period of 5 years, and these are my words.
Did he get royalties?
You can ask his followers. Go knock on Arville and ask them if. All right. So I shared the last time that what we're going to do, what I'm going to try and do, is each time I'm going to read the English elucidated text, the original English, the original translation, I should say, the translation of the original Hebrew text with elucidation of the Tanya, and then we'll talk about it here and there. So when I'm going to read something from the Tanya, I will say that the Tanya says, so you know that I'm quoting from it. So we're going to start chapter 1. This is talking about, am I good or bad? And this is going to talk about the idea of what this book is. So there's 5 parts to this book, to the Tanya. Part 1 is called the Book for In-Betweeners. And just briefly, what he mentioned is that in-betweeners basically means it's the you and me. Okay? We're the in-betweeners. We're the Beinonim. And so he's going to go into, well, how is it that we're the Beinonim? How is it that we're the in-betweeners? And am I good or bad? So section 1, 5 different types of people. So the Tanya says, the rabbis taught at the end of chapter 3 of Tractate Nidab, the Talmud, that before a child is born, his or her soul is made to swear an oath, be a righteous person, a tzaddik, and do not be a wicked person, a rasha. And even if the entire world tells you you are righteous, you should consider yourself like a wicked person. Some clarification is needed, because doesn't the Mishnah say the precise opposite? Don't consider yourself to be a wicked person. And also, if you consider yourself like a wicked person, as Tractate Niddah suggests, you will become downhearted and depressed, and you won't be able to worship God joyfully and positively. But if, on the other hand, you don't become sad at all from this wickedness of yours, you could come to be flippant about your moral and religious responsibilities. God forbid. Okay, so we'll pause there for a second. So basically, what the commentator here is talking about is that you should, when you see yourself, when somebody tells you should be entirely righteous, you should look at yourself as wicked. When somebody tells you that you're wicked, you should look at yourself as righteous. Okay, you should always be looking at both sides of things. If you get caught up in one or the other too much, you need to be aware of the possibility of really kind of screwing things up. So if you think of yourself as too righteous, you'll ignore the wickedness that's within you. You'll become, as it says, flippant about that, like you won't care. But if you become too downtrodden about your wickedness, then how are you going to live a life of joy? And Hashem commands you to live a life of joy. Okay? So he hasn't gotten into how we're supposed to resolve that issue, but he started so far with basically saying you should see yourself as righteous. Okay? That's how you should start. You should see yourself as righteous. So the Tanya continues. Now let's get to the explanation of these terms. From the Talmud, we find 5 categories. So here are the 5 categories. 1, the tzaddik who has it good in this world. 2, the tzaddik who has it bad in this world. So tzaddik, again, loosely, it translates as the righteous. So a righteous person who has it good in this world, a righteous person who has it bad in this world. Number 3, the rasha, the evildoer, who has it good in this world. Number 4, the rasha, the evildoer, who has it bad in this world. Number 5, the in-betweener, the Benoni, who is neither a tzaddik nor a Rasha, but has elements of both. Okay? So we've got these 5 different people. 2 sets of evildoers, 2 sets of tzaddikim, the Beinonim who are in between. Okay, and the Tanya continues. And after dismissing various possible interpretations, the Talmud finally explains that the worldly fortune or misfortune of a tzaddik is actually a reflection of his or her inner perfection. The tzaddik who has a good in this world enjoys a fortunate life because he or she is totally righteous. The tzaddik who has it bad in this world suffers misfortune because he or she is not totally righteous. In the section of the Zohar called Raya Mechemna, the faithful shepherd, which is basically speaking about Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe comes and is the faithful shepherd. Moshe comes and shares wisdom with Rabbi Shimon in the cave at a spiritual level. And in this section of the Zohar, the Torah portion of Mishpatim, the term tzaddik who has it bad is further clarified as an inner state. It means that the bad within him is suppressed by the good. And the Talmud at the end of chapter 9 of Tractate Brachot, it is written, in the case of the tzaddikim, the impulse to good is the internal judge of what to do or not to do. In the case of the Rashaim, the impulse to evil is their internal judge of what to do or not to do. In the case of the in-betweeners, both good and bad impulses are their internal judges of what to do or not to do. Okay. So again, we'll take a pause there and we'll see what all this is trying to say. So what it's saying is, yeah.
If you have someone who, on the surface is righteous, but yet is not, inwardly righteous, would that be a partial explanation of why bad things happen to, quote, good people? The person is not necessarily 100% good, but on the surface he or she appears to be good. Is that a much oversimplified version of that?
So, yeah, I think what it's saying here. All right, there's a little bit more commentary here. So you've got. So let's talk first about the tzaddikim here, about the righteous. Okay, so the idea of righteousness in this case are those who have mastered their evil inclination. That's what they are. Okay, so they may appear to have it bad, but what appears to be bad is just a quote-unquote external badness. It's an aspect of what's reflected not by their inner character, but by what is overwhelming their surroundings, what's overwhelming their world. And I think it says something like that basically that what happens is their bad is suppressed by the good. So whatever's inside of them, the internal circumstances behind everything that's happening to them externally is so overwhelmed by their character. Okay? So when you talk about a Rasha that has it good in this world, I think you're talking about something. We'll get to a little bit of that in just a minute here. Although I don't think he goes over. He doesn't say too much about the Rasha here. He talks mostly about the Beinonim. He basically goes from the Tzaddikim to the Beinonim very, very quickly. But what he does is he describes that the Rasha is the one who is overcome by their evil inclination constantly, right? So they fight against it in theory, but they're constantly overcome by their evil inclination, by their desire. That everybody's got that desire to do something bad, but some, like the tzaddikim, have come to such a place that they've perfected the level where the good overwhelms the bad. Okay? and the Rashaim, the evildoers, had not been able to overcome that. I think the larger experience of what appears externally is more of a tikkun process, which I think we'll also get to as well. If I remember correctly, we'll get to that in chapter 2. I'll see how quickly we can get to it. I realize this is going to take us a long time if we do it section by section, so we'll see how quickly we can get to it. All right. Let's see, we're picking up. All right, so the Tanya continues. Rabbah said, I, for example, am an in-betweener. Abaye said back to him, Master, you are denying everybody life, because if you, one of the most pious sages, are a mere in-betweener, then there can be no righteous people at all. Rabbah and Abaye were of the period of what they called Zugim. I think that's what they called it, Zugim. They're pairs. So there were a large number of these what's the word I'm looking for? Tanaim commentators, especially in the Talmud, who were pairs. It comes from an earlier stage of the commentators of the Talmud. Hillel and Shammai were actually considered a pair. Shammah and Avtalyon. Shammah, I think it's his name. Shammah and Avtalyon. These two were Abaye and Rabbah. And this guy Rabbah, who was considered one of the greatest, most righteous of all time, describes himself as an in-betweener. So his partner Abaye is arguing with him. He was his partner, he was also his student. So the Tanya continues, we need some clarification about this. So then it goes on. Also, we need to clarify what Eov, said when he quotes, Master of the universe, you have created righteous people and you have created wicked people. This is problematic because when the angel supervising conception questions God about the fate of a future child, that angel doesn't mention in his questions that the child will be righteous or wicked, since the matter will obviously be left to the individual's free choice. Okay, so the idea of, a lot of times we see somebody born and we think of them as a tzaddik from birth. You know, they're born of a certain family. You know, it's very clear that that child is going to be a tzaddik. Or you see somebody who grew up to be a tzaddik and you see that they were a tzaddik all their life. I mean, that's what it looks like. Like they almost didn't have a choice. But he's saying very clearly here, that's not the case. People always have free will. Okay, so the idea of righteousness and the ability to overcome your evil inclination is a free will choice. Even though right before it says, no matter what, you should remember that you are righteous. So even if the entire world tells you that you're wicked, you should know that you're righteous. So you should understand that this is always a choice. No matter who you see, no matter what you see they've done, it's always a choice. And even for that person who appears to be entirely righteous, it was still their free will choice to be entirely righteous. Nobody makes that determination at the point of birth. That's not a question that's asked. Okay. So then he goes on to what is a Benoni? So the Tanya continues here. We also need a real understanding of in-betweener status, for it definitely can't be understood as a person whose proportion of merits or transgressions is equal. Because if that were the case, how could Rabbah have mistaken himself for a Benoni, when such a degree of error could not be attributed solely to humility? So what he's saying here is, normally we think of an in-betweener, Benoni is, okay, I'm somewhere in between. I got a little bit of good, a little bit of bad. But we cannot say that that's possible because Rabbah would never have described himself as a Benoni, if that was the correct definition of Benoni. And we cannot attribute it to humility because that would be false humility. That's what he's saying here. That would be false humility for somebody who claims to be so righteous to say that who other people identify as righteous, to claim that he's a Benoni. That's ridiculous. That's off the charts of humility, and you cannot attribute it to that. So the Tanya continues. For Rabbah famously did not allow his mouth to stop studying to the extent that even the angel of death could not overpower him, since he was occupied with mitzvah constantly. So how could he have wrongly assessed himself to have transgressions in equal proportion to these mitzvahs? God forbid. Also, as we shall soon see, At the moment when a person transgresses, he is classified by the sages as a total rasha. And if he subsequently repents, he is classified as a total tzaddik. So at what point could he be an in-betweener? So does that make sense? So you've got a time-based issue that you're dealing with as well here. So the moment that somebody does something righteous, they are a tzaddik. And when they do something evil, they are a rasha. A total tzaddik and a total rasha. Okay? So we've got a time issue that we're dealing with on top of everything else. So the Tanya continues, and even a person who violates a minor rabbinic precept is considered a rasha, as stated in the Talmud and Tractate V'Yamod. And a person is deemed a rasha even if he had the opportunity to reprimand somebody else but failed to do so. Then all the more so with someone who actively neglects a biblical command that he could have observed would definitely be classified as a rasha. Such as, to cite a common example, any person who had the opportunity to study Torah but failed to do so, to whom the sages apply the verse, he has expressed contempt for the word of God. Obviously, this person who failed to observe a biblical command deserves the title rasha more than one who violates a rabbinic prohibition. So you're forced to conclude that the in-betweener is not even guilty of the common transgression of neglecting to study Torah for a single moment. Okay? So we're saying that somebody who neglects to study Torah for a single moment when they had the opportunity is a total rasha because they violated a precept. Okay? So if you want to try to refer to that person as an in-betweener, even that's going to be problematic. All right, so it continues here. And that is why Rabbah was able to make a mistake about himself and claim that he was a Benoni. And as for the common reference in rabbinic text to the Benoni as one with an equal proportion of transgressions to merits, and to the tzaddik as one with a majority of merits, which directly contradicts what we have demonstrated so far, that a Benoni does not transgress evil at all, this represents a figurative, imprecise use of the term tzaddik and Benoni for the purpose of illustrating an entirely different discussion, the method by which God rewards and punishes. This is because a person is judged by God according to the majority of his transgressions or merits, and is classified as righteous, not as a person, but in his verdict, when he is acquitted in judgment by God. Okay, so now what are we talking about? We're talking about the time of Rosh Hashanah. So Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. So I think actually Rabbi Wein shares this every year. He talks about the idea that when you come to Rosh Hashanah, so the first thing that we do is we confess all of our sins, right? We do the Hatarat Nedarim, and then we come to Rosh Hashanah, and actually we've got the process building up to Rosh Hashanah when we say, what do we say in the morning before we start Shacharit, right? In the week before Rosh Hashanah. It's Slichot. We say Slichot. Okay. Wow, that was a tough one. We're asking for levels of forgiveness. We blow the shofar in order to cleanse our negativity. When it comes to the days of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we want to see ourselves as Beinonim. Okay, we don't want to see ourselves as entirely righteous, because if we saw ourselves entirely righteous, we would ignore the fact that we've done negative things during the year that we want to be cleansed of. And if we saw ourselves as entirely negative, again, we would miss the precept that we need to live our lives with joy, especially in front of the Creator. So we want to see ourselves as Beinonim. That is what most people confuse in this context as being a Beinonim, being somebody who's equal in judgments and equal in righteousness, equal in their good deeds and their bad deeds. That is the way that Hashem looks at us when He is rendering judgment against us. That's not what we're talking about in this book. In this book, the term Benoni is referring to that level right below a tzaddik who basically has not been able to find a way for his good inclination to have completely overwhelmed his evil inclination. one who's constantly fighting that battle. And we'll see more of that as we continue here. So the Tanya continues here. When speaking of the true inner definitive quality that distinguishes the character of tzaddikim and beinonim, the sages taught in the case of tzaddikim, their impulse to good is their judge. The Talmud continues, as King David states in the verse, "My heart is empty within me." An empty heart means that the tzaddik is devoid of an impulse to evil. In the case of King David, this was because he annihilated his influence, subduing it through fasting. But anyone who has not yet reached this level of annihilating the impulse to evil, even if his merits outweigh his transgressions, which means that figuratively speaking, he would be described as righteous in verdict, as we have learned above. In reality, as long as he has not annihilated his impulse to evil, he is not at all at the level of being a tzaddik. That is why our sages taught it in Midrash. The Blessed One saw that the tzaddikim were few, so he carefully placed them in each generation. We also find a higher level of tzaddik whose righteousness is unparalleled by any other in his generation, as the verse states, that tzaddik is the foundation of the world. Okay, so the conclusion of this section 2 about the Benoni is that the true Benoni is the one who is, again, not at all righteous in the words of the Tanya, but not at all righteous because they are constantly finding that they have to rely on their inner judge for their good inclination to overcome and overwhelm their evil inclination. Where the truly righteous have already achieved that. They have no remaining evil inclination. And again, that's why he mentions just in this closing section, we call people tzaddikim all the time, but we kind of misuse that. The people that we identify as tzaddikim are really beinonim. Okay? That the true tzaddikim are very, very few. There's only a handful in any given generation of the ones who have reached such a level that they don't even have an inkling of an evil inclination left anymore. Okay. Now we're going to get to a very beautiful section where he calls on the Zohar and on the teachings of the Ari very heavily. Section 3, the doctrine of two souls. So the Tanya continues. Now that it is clear that we are speaking of an inner psychological distinction that distinguishes the Benoni from the Tzaddikim, let's turn to an explanation from the Kabbalistic sources. The following is based on what Rabbi Chaim Vital of blessed memory writes in Sharei HaKedusha. Whenever you see, most of the time when you see the teachings of the Ari referenced, it's going to say what Rabbi Chaim Vital wrote in. So Rabbi Chaim Vital was the Ari's primary student in Tzfat, and the Ari wrote almost nothing during the time that they were learning together. And if I remember correctly, he wasn't, Rabbi Chaim Vital was not actually permitted to write during their learning sessions. So basically what it says is that over the course of 20 years after the Ari's death, Rabbi Chaim Vital wrote everything down that he remembered from what he learned from the Ari. And it takes up a series of volumes about this big. So, and this particular one is from Sharei HaKedusha. So again, many times you'll say, Rabbi Chaim Vital will say, I learned in the name of my teacher, or my teacher taught me, or I learned from my teacher, or my teacher used to. So whenever that you hear that language, he's speaking of the Ari HaKadosh. Okay. So the Tanya continues. In Sharei HaKedusha, we learn that every person in Israel, both Tzaddik and Rasha, possesses two souls, referred to in the Tanya as the animal soul and the divine soul. As the verse states, for this is what the high and exalted one says, the spirit that enwraps itself is from me, and the souls which I have made. These are two complete independent souls in their own right, and not merely levels within a single soul. One soul stems from the egocentric forces known as klipa, These forces of klipa are also known in the Zohar and the Kabbalistic literature as the other side, the Sidra Achra, that which is not holy. The animal soul of klipa is embodied in your blood, energizing your body, as the verse states, the soul of the flesh is in the blood. Okay, so far he's mentioned what he refers to as the animal soul. So he's talking about the fact, he starts by quoting the idea that there are two souls within each person. So that's the phrase here. The spirit that enwraps itself is from me and the souls which I have made, which are two different souls. The spirit is in the singular, meaning it's from a single individual, from Hashem, and then each one of you has your own soul. And he refers to them in the plural, souls which I have made. Two complete individual souls. And they speak of the idea here of klipot. So the klipot are a klipa is a shell, or a vessel is a kli. Yeah, that's a kli, and we have multiple ones. They're klim, so it's different than a klipa. A klipa is a shell, or I think like an orange, the peel, I think is also referred to as a klipa, if I remember correctly. So it's things that conceal, that create an illusion. That's what a klipa does. A klipa makes you think, like you ever like you use orange peel, right, in a recipe, and it gives you not a bitter taste, but sour. It's not exactly the word, but it's there's very little relationship to the fruit, right? To the sweetness of the fruit. The flavor is similar. It's orange, but the sweetness of it is concealed by the klipa. And I think we'd say the same thing is true of like a nut. You've got inside this wonderful fatty, juicy nut, and you've got this hard shell that's on the one hand protecting it, but on the other hand creating an illusion of what's available and inside. So this is our ego. Okay, this is what our ego does to us. This is what our animal soul, the soul that's embedded in our body, and as they say, is energizing your body. It's the flesh and in your blood. Our body, our blood, our physical life, our ego creates an illusion for us. We're not able to see our true self, our true soul, the soul that comes from, they both come from Hashem, but the part that is the essence of Hashem versus the part that's been given to each one of us as an individual that represents our animal soul. So our animal soul is our egocentric, klipa-covered, body-encompassed part of our soul. And that's what he's talking about in this section. Okay, the Tanya continues. From the animal soul, which is invested directly into the body, all the bodily temperaments arise. The negative temperaments stem from the negative side of the animal soul's 4 spiritual elements. So these spiritual elements are A, the choleric temperament of anger and arrogance from the negative side of the element of fire, the overstated self-image of arrogance, reflecting physical fire's tendency to rise upward. Okay? So, first characteristic is anger and arrogance. It's negative, comes from the element of fire. Self-image, arrogance, overstated self-image. Okay, B. Phlegmatic temperament, seeking physical gratification and pleasures, which stems from the negative side of the element of water, reflecting the physical reality that all the pleasures are ultimately cultivated from water. So water is a representation of sustenance. So like it says, this is coveting to steal your friend's money, wife. This is commentary. Everything that he has in order to indulge in them, jealousy of wealth, jealousy of your own friend, etc. Okay, C, the third one. The sanguine temperament arising from the negative side of the element of air in the animal soul, which represents silliness, mockery, boasting of virtues you don't have, and other worthless discussions that benefits neither the body nor the soul. Okay? And then the fourth one says, indeed, the melancholic temperament of laziness and depression, stemming from the negative side of the element of earth of the animal soul. Okay? So we have these four elements that are driven by our animal soul. Anger, coming from arrogance. Desire for self-gratification and pleasures, physical gratification. C, mockery, silliness, boasting, bragging, worthless discussion. D, laziness and depression. Okay? Those are all negative traits that come from the animal soul. But then he mentions, the Tanya continues, but also the positive temperaments with which the Talmud testifies all Israel are naturally born, such as compassion and generosity, stem from the animal soul. Because in the case of the Israelites, the animal soul of Klipah is from a derivative called Klipat Noga, which refers to the bright Klipah, which contains some easily accessible sparks of good too. This mixing of good sparks resulting from the secret of the biblical tree of knowledge, good and evil. Okay, I seem to remember we talked about this a little bit in one of our recent classes. This idea that that the sin of Adam is what originally caused bad to be mixed within the good. So the connection to the tree of life, good and evil. So the Ari writes about this somewhat extensively when it comes to food and why it was that originally only very specific vegetables were considered kosher. Kosher is not a good term because they didn't originally use that term in the Garden of Eden. But why those were the ones that were accessible, and it was because there was at the time the souls that were in animals were somewhat comparable to the souls that were in human beings. It's a complex concept, but the idea simply being that there was no evil mixed within them. Okay, they were entirely good. So there was nothing for a human being to consume, nothing that they were eligible to consume, so to speak. Once we had the sin of Adam, additional things became available to us to eat because evil became mixed with good. It happened again at the time of the flood of Noah, which is why we have the laws B'nai Noach, where additional foods become available to us. And then it happens, you can say it happens again, but actually it happens in the opposite way. It happens in the level of restriction, where certain animals are identified as being kosher. Certain fowls, certain animals, certain insects are identified as becoming kosher, are being available to be kosher, because they have good and bad within them that our body is able to separate. Okay? Which is, which mean, and it's talking about it quite literally. Quite literally, that our body has the ability to separate bad from good, which, the good becomes energy and the bad, goes where it's supposed to go.
Right.
But at the time of Adam, no such thing existed. There was only good. Only good. So in some ways you could say he didn't really eat. He didn't have a need to eat in the way that we ate, because the way that we eat now, because there was no separation of good and evil. There was only good. Okay, so that's what he's talking about. That's the relationship here. So there became this type of separation where evil became mixed with good, but he's talking about this klipat noga, which it says contains some easily accessible sparks of good too. So klipat noga is still a klipa. It's still entirely negative, but immediately surrounding it are sparks of goodness. It indicates spark of holiness lying just below the surface, which could be redeemed under the right circumstances. Okay, so then the Tanya continues. This is not the case with the souls of the evil nations of the world, which as stated in Eitz HaChaim, stem from the three other impure klipot that are devoid of any good. Eitz Chaim, when he says Eitz Chaim, this is one of the other books of the Ari. Eitz Chaim's approach is supported by teachings of the Zohar, such as all good that the nations do, they do for themselves. And some teaching of the Talmud, such as in the commentary, the kindness of the nations is sinful. That according to Rabban Gamliel, all the charity and kindness done by the nations of the world is sinful to them, since they do it only to put on airs. So he's talking about the difference between God's nation, the nation of the chosen people, who have this fourth klippah that has sparks of goodness that are right under the surface and could be redeemed by us under the right circumstances, versus the rest of the nations, the 70 nations that the Torah speaks about, that don't have that access to those redeeming qualities, those redeeming light, sparks of light. They essentially only have access to the negative portions of the klipot, and anything that they do that appears to be good, they're doing it only for their own self-serving purposes, just to make themselves appear good. Okay, again, we're speaking in spiritual terms, so don't get too caught up in what you see other people doing, whether it's good or bad or righteous, or whether they're only doing it for themselves. But in a spiritual term, they don't have access to the same thing that the animal soul, again, we still have to keep in mind, we're talking about our animal soul. But our animal soul, which is made up of 4 negative klipot, has one of the klipot, one of the shells, that has sparks of light that are just slightly under the surface, just beyond our reach, that could be redeemed in the right circumstances. And that's what we're trying to get to. Okay, so he's pretty much done now speaking about the animal soul. So we'll spend 3 minutes or so just introducing chapter 2, the peace of God in you, your second soul. So the Tanya continues here. The second soul in the Israelite, the so-called divine soul, is a piece of God above, literally. And the commentators go on to mention that this word literally it's rarely used. And it's a very unique idea that he refers to it as literally. So it's no joke. When he says literally, it's saying we all have a piece of God inside of us. Not how should I say this? Not just in a, like a lot of times when we think about God, we think about it in terms of his mercy, in terms of his knowledge, but he's not knowledgeable. He is knowledge. He's not merciful. He is mercy. But this is saying, don't think about it that way. You never see the word mamash. You don't see the word literally referring to those characteristics. Now you do. It says, a piece of God above. So literally, a piece of God above. We have a piece of God within each one of us. Not exactly individually, because remember, this soul is referred to in the singular, and the animal soul is referred to in the plural. But we have a piece of God from above. And the Tanya continues, the idea of a divine soul is suggested by the verse describing man's creation. And God blew into his nostrils the breath of life. And the same idea is suggested by the phrase, the soul that you breathed into me. And as the sages of the Zohar state that unlike speaking, which uses relatively little breath, one who blows from his innards, meaning from the innermost depths of his being. For when a person blows forcibly, he exhales with a deep-rooted inner energy. In the same vein, the Midrash depicts the Jewish souls as having arisen in the mind of God before the creation of the world. As the verse states, Israel, my firstborn son, you are children to God, your God. This means that just as a child is derived from the brain of the father, likewise each person in Israel is derived from God's blessed thought and wisdom, so to speak. And I think that's a good place to stop. So it's leaving us here with this idea that Hashem basically made a real effort. He again, it says he blows from his innards. He didn't speak when he created the world. God said, "Let there be light." God said, "Let there be animals." God said, "Da da da da." That's not how we came about. We came about through the breath of Hashem blowing through our nostrils. That's how the divine soul and the peace of God's essence came to be within each one of us through effort on behalf of the Creator, as opposed to the simple effort of just blah, 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 blah. Again, not that God ever does blah, blah, but if we think about it in our terms, it's so easy for us to speak, but to put the effort in, to blow into the nostrils, this is extreme. It takes effort, it takes energy, and that's what was invested into us to create the divine soul.
Is that from Adam down to all of us, or directly from God?
I'm trying to think if he's going to address that. So there's again a very Kabbalistic idea that there were 600,000 original souls or sparks of souls that were present at Mount Sinai. So I think that what we're talking about here, if we go all the way back to the story of creation, the Kabbalistic story of creation, what we're really talking about here is that it was originally breathed into Adam, and that, again, when Adam sinned and was forced to leave Gan Eden, there was a shattering of the singular vessel into the 600,000 original souls, and those souls have been further divided amongst us in order for us to achieve each of the little parts of the tikkun in order to have the final correction and bringing a Messiah. So I know I just summarized a whole lot there, but I think
That's great.
I think in very Kabbalistic terms, you're starting from the original breath of the creation of Adam, and that has spilled itself out into the sparks and the division of still one soul, but the division of that soul into multiple parts, into the sparks that resulted in the 600,000 souls and then to each of us.
That's awesome.
Okay, wonderful.
Thank you. That was awesome.
All right.